Sure. I'm Michelle Blaslin. I represent Wyndham 3 in Northern Wyndham County, Westminster, Rockingham, and Brookline.
Great, nice to meet you.
Greg Burke from Cabot, representing Cabot, Danville, and Beecham.
Oh,
Hi, John O'Brien. I represent Windsor Orange 1, which is Royalton in my hometown.
great.
Hi, this is not Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, Bridgewater, West Hartford.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, and David Durfee. Nice to say hello. Shaftesbury, Sunderland, Boston.
I'm Leland Morgan. I represent all of Grand Isle County and the western Gilford County. Milton.
Nice to meet you.
Jen Lipsky, I represent Lamoille 1 district, which is the town of Stowe.
Oh, great. Do you want to get started?
I think so. Yeah, we have another committee member who will probably be coming in shortly. But why don't we go ahead and get started?
Okay, and I think we're going to hear from myself and Ellen Kaler, who's also from the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. My name is Liz Smith, and as David introduced me, I'm the new executive director at the Vermont Council on Rural Development. I live in St. Albans, Vermont. My uncle used to live in Peacham, so I'm in Northeast Kingdom area. Sorry, I'm looking at you, but it was you. So one of the functions of the Council on Rural Development about 12 years ago, we started supporting what is known as the Working Lands Coalition and the Working Lands Partnership. And it really is a group of organizations and individuals that have come together to support working lands in the state of Vermont. And one of our functions as a coalition is to identify some legislative priorities to support farmers and foresters in the state of Vermont. And the Working Lands Enterprise Fund and the Enterprise Initiative and the Enterprise Grant are some of those initiatives that we really value because of what they do for the state of Vermont, both the economy, the culture, and the people that live here. And what we're here to request for the budget is an appropriation of $3 million to the Enterprise Fund for FY 2026. Right now, I think the governor has, and we're very grateful that we have a base funding amount right now of $1 million in the governor's budget. And we ask that you consider increasing that amount to $3 million. As you may know, and I think this probably was covered when the team from VAFFM, VAA, Vermont Agency of Agricultural, Food and Markets, came in to talk with you that program is incredibly overprescribed. According to them, their 2024 report, the applications totaled over $16 million in applications, and they were only able to award $3 million of available funding. So even that overprescription, even with going up to $3 million from the $1 million that the governor has provided, is still not going to be enough to answer the call of agricultural and forestry businesses in the state of Vermont. It's been a core funding mechanism for our local economy. It's helped Vermonters start, expand, and pivot their businesses so they are able to maintain their existence and contribute to our rural economy. In addition, healthy working lands are forest and fields. So this is another hat that I wear. I'm the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee for Lake Champlain, totally volunteer. But one of the things we know and have noticed as long as I've been on that committee is forests and farms are still the best way. Healthy soils are the best way to help mitigate climate change, attenuate water, and take care of the people of Vermont. And so the more we can invest in the lands that support that, the better it is going to be. And the more we can support the entrepreneurs that are using those lands, the forests and farms, to make a living, the better, more resilient Vermont we're going to have now and in the future.
Here's a dumb question.
No dumb questions. I asked a lot of them, so.
1 million in base funding, asking for 3 million. Last year, the awards were 3 million. So where did the other 2 million come from?
I think it was one-time funding last year. I don't know that I can answer that 100%. I think it might have been one-time funding. It was base funding? Base funding.
3 million? No, I'm just wondering. Denise just said, and we heard earlier, that 3 million went out to working lands grantees when 16 million was asked for. So where was that?
We funded
Other money.
last year
It's a line item, right? Also.
Yes.
Base was 1 million.
Yeah, the base is $1 million. We increased it. It was not always $1 million. Ellen's about to jump in and either correct me or confirm. But we did have one-time funding last year. We have had for several years. But Ellen, do you want to? Hi, good morning.
Good morning. For the record, Ellen Kaler, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. My understanding was that the base request was $1 million last year from the governor. You put in another $1 million, and then 2 years ago, there was a one-time $2 million ARPA allocation, and the board at that time decided to allocate $1 million 1 year and another $1 million the second year. So the fiscal 24 happened to be 3 million because of that sequence of events. But for fiscal 25, which is the current fiscal year, the board only has $1 million to allocate. So we have dropped from 2024 of 3 down to 1 million for 2025.
And Ellen, so one of those millions was spent. Is there another one still coming, or they're both
No,
spent?
that was, one was, there was an extra $1 million, that 2 million was awarded, I believe, for fiscal 23. And so $1 million went out in the fiscal 23 that got added, and then another $1 million for fiscal 24.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
In fiscal 25, there's only $1 million to go. And so what we're saying is in fiscal 26, we'd like to get it back up to the 3 million. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for that history.
And we talk about the base as though, and it largely is, but as though it's, once it's in there, sacrosanct, and it can't or will never be touched. And, as long as revenue is there to support it, then, and I guess as long as there's legislative will, because, there's nothing that says it won't be changed at some point. But generally speaking, if something's in the base, and so there's $1 million now in the base, and that was there, that has been there for a few years, and it's still in the governor's recommended budget.
Yeah, recommended budget right now.
So your request is for an additional 2 million.
Yeah, we would be asking for more, just so you know. I think if we could, but 2 million, an additional 2 million right now, I think would get us to the point where we actually feel like there's more money and more resources for our farm and forestry individuals. And so one of the things we did at VCRD and why we're so interested in working lands, it's a core component of our state's culture, as well as a big part of our resiliency in the face of climate change. The people who steward our working lands are important to our state's sustainability, as well as our food system and security, which I know people are worried about right now. And our rural economy depends heavily on these businesses, and our rural communities depend on the people who steward our land. I put the Working Lands Coalition handout, our platform, in everybody's boxes this week. So you should have that, but if you need additional copies, let us know. But it looks like this. Basically, it's a 2-pager that we've put together for this. And it has all the data really succinctly from last year, from 2024 in here that was probably reviewed with the agency at GUIDE this past week. And I'm right down the road, so our office is right at the corner of Bailey Ave. If you need us to come back or share any more information with your colleagues around this, but the way that I look at it, I live in Franklin County. We're surrounded by people who work our lands and our forests. I think we're maybe Addison County, I don't know, but the largest maple producer in the state, and dairy. And these grants have helped, friends of mine, families that I know in our communities, to really help them kind of reimagine their businesses if that's what's needed, as well as support equipment that they've needed. There's a sawmill right up the road from us that's benefited from this program, and they've got multi-generations of people that are taking advantage of the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative and the grants that they've received. So the way I look at it, it's an investment in our communities, and it's really important that we continue to invest in them. I'm going to turn it to Ellen.
Before you do.
Yeah. Oh, if there's any questions, sorry,
Yeah,
of
if
course.
there's questions.
Yeah. Are there any questions?
Yeah. Let's speak.
Mill and Fletcher.
There's one in Fletcher, but I'm talking about the Hudak farm.
Actually, down
Yeah, right. They're literally neighbor.
Right
Yeah.
from both.
Yep. Have both received.
Towns, St. Albans.
Ellis.
St. Albans. Yeah. Yeah. Hudak's. They have a farm stand, a really, great farm stand.
Big area.
Yeah, yeah,
Do a lot.
yeah, they do a lot. And then their son is the one who started the sawmill. And he does timber frame housing. So, yeah.
I'm just say something, and Ellen, you can jump in then, or if you have any response to it too. This committee, 2 years ago, had language added to the budget for a pilot program for small farms transitioning to get moving from dairy to other things, I think was the idea. And we added $150,000, I think, ultimately, which was for FY24. And we saw in the reports last week and this week, we saw some of the recipients that had specifically benefited from that, and heard that there was a great deal of demand because they were, smaller grants that could be used. I wonder whether you have any thoughts on that section of the program. It was a pilot program, so we have the opportunity now to sort of think about, is that something we want to particularly focus on? If we were to add more funding, that might be a direction to go.
I mean, from personal experience, I know a lot of farmers in Franklin County are transitioning out of dairy. There's been a lot of movement, especially from the small farmers, to sell their cows or, go more into leasing their land, or even meat, beef cows. But I don't know specifically like how that program impacted people in my region necessarily. I don't know if Ellen has more thoughts or ideas around that. Was it part of the working lands?
It was rolled
Fund.
up into the,
It was.
working lands for,
Specific for that transition?
yeah, I think certainly for administrative purposes, we hadn't originally, I don't think originally envisioned it being done that way, but that's the way it was ultimately done. And I think it was a separate program within a larger umbrella, or separate grant opportunity anyway.
And there's a lot of pressures on dairy farmers right now, as everybody knows in this room probably, so.
Anyway, Ellen, you're welcome to weigh in on that if you want, but also whatever you'd like to say.
Yeah, I'll weigh in on it. From the perspective of, again, I'm speaking on behalf of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund and Vermont Farm to Plate. I am not speaking on behalf of the Working Lands Enterprise Board or anybody else. The Sustainable Jobs Fund is a member of the Working Lands Coalition, so my testimony today is purely going to stay in that lane. But as we mentioned when we met with you to go over the Vermont agriculture strategic plan and food system strategic plan, we noted that there's a continuum of ag and food businesses, and the same applies for forest products businesses that are at different stages of development, right? So if you're more of a startup or a really small scale enterprise, there are different funding needs that you have, and there's different level of access to capital that is available to you as a very small enterprise. Grant funds is one of the best options at that early stage, as well as small scale, when you want to try to expand your operation, or in some cases change your operation. You've tried something for a while. You've only done direct market sales as a small farm, and you want to figure out, how do I start to sell, let's say, into institutions more, or sell into grocery stores more? That requires a large jump in revenue that is probably not going to happen at your small scale of actual sales. So how do you go from making that jump from being very small to, say, a little bit bigger than what you currently are? Grant funding is one of the best sources, and in many cases, one of the only sources, because you may not be able to get a bank loan at this stage of your development. So very supportive of the impact that small grants can have on smaller scale, either in size or in revenue base enterprises. The key thing, though, that I think is really important to remember is that the Working Lands Enterprise Fund has always done small grants. The business enterprise application, that pool, it has always served small entities. And so from an efficiency of state government perspective, and I think it makes a lot, and given the expertise that's on the board itself, I think it's very prudent and wise to have the small, any focus on small grants happen within that program, because it is very nimble, it is very on top of things, it has a fantastic review process, the staff is great, and the board has historically always thought about these smaller grants and making sure that there's representation around the state in terms of their allocation of funds. So if you all would like to be able to call attention to the importance of these small grants, that of course is your purview. You could always do something such as request the added $2 million in one time and allocate an amount, 150 to 250, whatever you choose, towards making sure that is going to these smaller enterprises. But I would counsel against thinking about a standalone program, just because it takes just as much effort to create a $10,000 grant agreement as it does a $50,000 grant agreement or a $100,000 grant agreement from a staff perspective.
Great, thank you. Representative O'Brien.
Just while you're both here, I have a general policy question that tangentially maybe Working Lands covers, but Denise, you really brought it up that the other day, looking at development in Vermont, you have Franklin and Addison County are by almost all metrics the two most agricultural counties in the state. They're also probably the two with the most development pressures on them as Chittenden County fills up. And so I just wondered, is that something our committee should be focusing on? Do all the things you do you think about that too? I mean, we're really interesting. I was looking around the room here. We represent almost every county in the state here, but
We do.
those two, not so much. We don't really have a Franklin or a little bit, right? A Franklin or an Addison County person here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Representative O'Brien, and something to really think about. That as the challenge, of course, is that in Addison and Franklin County, but also in Orleans County, they are much larger on the dairy front. Though those operations tend to be much larger, meaning that they can be 500, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 acres. So from a development pressure perspective, it has an even bigger impact if the farms in those counties were to go out of business and that land was lost to agricultural production or forest production, for instance. So I think it makes sense to be asking that question, because development pressures are, as you say, much higher on Addison and Franklin counties.
I ditto that. Yeah, I mean, we see it every day, right? Like farm fields being used for housing developments. So yeah, it's been happening. So, and there's opportunity, I think, with like the village centers, and like the city is doing a lot of infill right now in St. Albans City. I'm the chair of our planning commission right now, and we just got a really amazing housing development that's happening in an old brownfield site. So I think there's ways to be smart, and the town is talking about growth centers at the exit 19 and exit 20, so that's where they're thinking about developing, because there's already development there. But the Walmart that went in just down the road from Hudax was a 10-year battle. And is in had to mitigate the wetlands and the farmlands around it. So it's kind of one of those things that has been happening over the last 20 to 30 years, and it's going to continue to happen I think Northwest Vermont is one of the counties with Chittenden, our Franklin County is slated to grow 2 to 3%, I think, over the next year or two. So it's like one of the ones that you're seeing that trajectory change going up as opposed to going down in other parts of the state. We'd love to share the wealth of people to other parts of the state. That's from my VCRD hat. We would love to help communities develop, and I mean, that's what we do. So
There's also the obvious corridor, and you go up to Highgate where the Canadian market and the development of the industrial market from enterprise drive large scale. It's welcome.
Yeah, it's welcome.
Ellen,
Well, full disclosure, my husband runs Franklin County Industrial Development Corporation.
Okay.
So I'm like tied to a lot of
I
things.
didn't
Yeah, so-
That's
yeah.
a name.
Smith is a big, yeah.
yeah, right. Okay, believe that. Ellen,
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few more points if that's okay. I didn't know if there was a.
yeah, no, if the floor is yours.
Yeah, so, I think the thing I wanna reiterate is, the Vermont Agriculture Food System and strategic plan that we spent so much time with you talking about in January. And I know you've heard from Commissioner Fitzko about the Forest Future Roadmap. You could think about both of those plans as those are guiding documents that the Working Lands Enterprise Board uses as it thinks strategically about what it wants to take the funds of any given fiscal year and put it towards. Those are guiding documents. You could think about the state general fund dollars that goes into the Working Lands Enterprise Fund as the state's commitment or an expression of your commitment to helping to implement those two plans, right? Because this is like the state's money in to those two strategic plans for forest and for ag and food systems. So which is why it's so critical. And those funds, as we've mentioned before, function like equity. That means that it becomes, it is the revenue of that business. So then when they go to get a loan from, let's say, VitaVac or a bank, they can use that grant funding in the form of equity to make the case that they can qualify for that additional money and loans, right? So there's a lot of different functions that this type of state grant funding provides. I just want to make that point. I also want to make the point that the staff, a couple of staff members from the Sustainable Jobs Fund serve as reviewers during the annual review process. So we lend our staff to be part of the group that looks at grant applications every year, which is what I know Elizabeth Sipple mentioned to you guys last week when she was in testifying about the whole process that the board goes through to ensure that we're really that the board is putting funding towards really solid projects. And so my staff helps to contribute to the expertise of that review process. And then I know, for instance, when the agency staff was in talking about the changes over time of the levels of funding and just how challenging that is for businesses year over year. If you think about it, you're wanting to make an investment, it takes a lot of time to think through like which piece of equipment or what should be the square footage of that expansion of my barn or something like that I want to make. And and grants come around once a year for Working Lands Enterprise Fund. So if you're not quite ready, when we have a year where we have more funding, and you might scramble to put an application in when you're not quite ready. And then if you don't get it, it can be a real deflator for then pressing forward. Whereas if there was a day when we could get to $3 or $5 million every year in base funding for this program, then forest and farm and food businesses would just be able to count on that, would know like, okay, this is a real source of funding that during my expansion period, I could viably go after. It doesn't mean they'll get it, but they could go at it and have a level of more consistency in the level of funding that's available year over year. So that's why in fiscal 24, as we discussed, the board had $3 million to be putting out. It would be terrific if you all could do $2 million in one time additionally on top of the governor's recommend to get back to $3 million for fiscal 26. Even better would be to get to $3 million base So, and I know that, you all yesterday, when, Demetrius Reed and Glenn Evans were in from BTSU, you know, that was the perfect example of a Working Lands Enterprise grant of $250,000 that went to the 1787 Butchery Project. You know, those are those really, when there's more funding, when we can get to $3 million or $5 million with the Working Lands Enterprise Fund, those larger awards become possible. Right? There can be 4 or 6 grants in a year that are at, say, 150 or 250 scale, and then the rest is 50,000 and below, for instance. So by having more funds, there can be a greater scale of operations that are served by those funds. I know that, for instance, with the 2025 fiscal 25 funds, there was only $1 million, and so all of the grants are $50,000 or lower. That means that any larger project, the max that they can go after is $50,000. And for some of these larger projects, like putting in 3-phase power at a sawmill, or putting in middle of the supply chain storage or aggregation space, like, I mean, 50,000 is great, but it's not what is needed to then really get to that next stage for those larger projects. So having that full range available from the small all the way up to the larger impact scale ones is really, really beneficial and having that consistent year over year, really key. So just offer that for your consideration to back up what Denise said. And I would also, my other request is, if there's any chance that you can talk to your friends at House Commerce Committee to do the same in their budget memo, that would be terrific. I know Amy Schollenberger is going to be meeting with them next Wednesday to make that request. Many of us are also making that request of them. And that, because the history of the Working Lands Enterprise Fund, when it first got started in 2012, was that it was a joint project of the House Commerce Committee and the House Agriculture Committee, because agriculture development is economic development, and that those two, you all have a history of working together and advocating for this program year over year. So thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, both of you. While we're about to transition to our next budget conversation, I'm just going to say aloud that to your point, Ellen, about consistency from year to year, we are living in times, post-pandemic times, where we've heard consistently, I mean, I'm going to say for maybe 4 years, both from the administration and from our own JFO, from the economists who work across legislative and executive branches, that the flow of the economy has reached a point in its cycle where things are not going to be as good in the future. And yes, we can look at the history of whether it's this program or other programs and see there was a couple of years here around 2020 and after where funding increased dramatically. And the message we're getting, again, globally, is can't count on that money to scale back our expectations for what's available. And the frustration for me anyway is that in each of the 4 years, we've ended up with pretty large unexpected surpluses. And this year, when we closed out the budget in May, we said, if there's any extra money, let's put it towards these programs. And fortunately, there was extra money and we were able to put it towards some programs. Working Lands was not one of them. But the challenge in looking at all the requests that we're getting is that we do need to work within the limitations of what has been forecast for revenue. And that's an agreement between the executive branch and the legislative branch on what that total amount is. So as again, it's frustrating to know that we're being lectured to a little bit on one end of the year, and then at the other end of the year, it turns out, oh, you know what? The economy is actually sailing along pretty well. We'll have to see whether that's still the case, in June. But anyway, thank you both. That's Representative O'Brien.
No, I'm just gonna add that if we look at it in a, sort of It's a Wonderful Life scenario, if all of a sudden the Goodrich doesn't get that grant or Myers doesn't get that grant, we realize the impact of not having that extra money. And it's pretty depressing to think about those outcomes.
Well,
Yeah.
to Chair Durfee's point, I think part of the reason why the economy has been chugging along as well is because we have been making those investments. It's like you spend some money to make more money. So there's a virtuous cycle there that can go in the opposite direction. So totally understand the limitations and just want to encourage you all to support the fund.
Isn't that what a TIF grant is? It's using money to make money down the road that everyone loves to, on one side, the TIF grants, but when we come to working land grants and stuff, that
Yeah, no, I think I see where you're going there. Yeah. All right, great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having us.
Really appreciate it.
And your testimony is on our website.
Yes.
Okay.
If I have another bill.
You did.
I did, great, awesome.
Somebody did not have.
Okay.
All right, so we're gonna move
very
on
much.
to the
Rest of your day.
Department of Forest Parks and Recreation and their budget request. Or that department section of the governor's budget. Morning.
Good morning.
better smile, getting in the hot seat, no fear,
Oh, no, I hope it's not the hot seat, right?
not here.
Great, good morning. You all know me for the record, Danielle Fitzko, Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation.
I need to get connected.
Yep.
Hi, Ansley Bloomer, Director of Finance and Administration. Thanks for having me.
Your name is?
Ansley Bloomer.
Ansley's the money is behind
We need-
NPR.
We need to have side conversations outside if we're gonna have them, which is fine, but just the mics pick it up and it makes it a little distracting, so.
So we're here to share FPR's budget that's in the governor's recommended budget. We have a standard presentation that we provide. It has a lot of overview of FPR that this committee probably does not need because we've been here several times already, but I'll kind of go through the slides. And then in any specific area you want to sort of dive into, we're happy to go any further. So just, I guess, give it a minute for Ainsley to get those slides up. I can kind of give a high level, right? So you'll see in our budget is $54 million overall, which is an increase of about 7%. Overall, we don't have. Yeah, overall, we don't have any sort of new programming or one-time funds. It's basically that increase that you'll see is increased just with the upward pressures of salaries and operations, and also federal funds that we've received, particularly for land acquisition and some IRA funds for forest resilience programming, which we're watching very closely with the current federal administration. We do have a slide that kind of outlines our federal funds right now. So we have a mission and team thing that I can go through quickly. Our budget overview, some key changes from the previous year, some initiatives and challenges that we're working on, and then we had the detailed budget development form, which is sort of in the weeds. So FPR, we're Forest Parks and Recreation. And this is, I think I've shared, this is our team. Kate Eberly, who I know you all know very well already. She's our Legislative Affairs and Communications. You've met Oliver Pearson, Director of Forest. I don't think you've met Nate McKean, but he's our Director of State Parks. And you know state parks, 55 of them all across the state. And I think maybe not this year, but I expect maybe you may meet Becca Washburn. She's our Lands Administration and Recreation Director. And then Ainsley's our business office lead. As you know, 135 year-round staff, and then we blow up in the summer. And I think we've talked about our different programmatic areas. So I'll pass through that unless you have any questions on sort of what we do.
Go ahead, Representative Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. Are you gonna be picking up the national parks people that,
I did talk to the forest supervisor this week and just to say, thinking of you, and he's like, I don't know what's gonna look like on the other end. They certainly lost a lot of staff already.
So
Green Mountain National Forest and Finger Lakes.
through the USDA cuts.
Yep. a lot of staff that were in that probationary period that they bring on and halt on being able to hire temporary staff for the summer season.
Okay, and that, so just like the state brings on temporary staff, the federal government would.
Certainly during the field season, that's when they do a lot of the work on the ground.
Okay.
We are partnering with them. We do have a good neighbor authority agreement and we have some funds. So we'll be hiring a temporary staff person that will be deployed on working with them,
Is that coming out of,
coming out of Forest Service dollars that we've had in-house for a while. This slide sort of gives you a bucket of where funds are appropriated basically by program area. That big blue bucket is state parks. That's at about $19 million. When you look at our state parks budget, it's about 75% of the budget is mainly from sort of admissions and services that like selling firewood and ice or renting out boats. And then a small portion, about $4 million, comes from revenue generated from 7 agreements, ski lease agreements. So we always look at that sort of funding that comes in as like, that's the Vermonter portion. That's why we keep the admission prices low. And then the rest of that is general funds. Lands administration looks really big, and that's because that includes funding for land acquisitions. We have several grants in-house now from Forest Legacy Funds for land acquisitions. And this year, if the funding continues and we continue to move forward, we have up to 12 to 15 land acquisitions that are in the works right now. To the right of that is outdoor recreations. We do a lot of pass-through grants to municipalities and nonprofits to support equitable outdoor recreation. So that's mostly just pass-through funds. I got my glasses today, so. Yeah, and the bucket in the corner to the right, those are mostly the forestry programs. You can kind of see where the investment goes. Forest health and fire protection looks large, but we actually pass through $1 million to the Forest Ecosystem Management Cooperative, which is a regional forest health initiative. Forestry operations at state lands management, private lands, which is our county foresters. You can see water quality and regulatory work, urban and community forestry, small, and then forest products, that's for small. We know how important the forest economy is. That is our smallest program with only 2 staff people.
it's 55 million total chart, and can you, these are expenses, I realize, but how much of the 55 million comes from federal funding?
I think that's coming right up.
Slide.
Yep, I'm gonna pass it.
Coming right up.
And Representative Boston had a question too.
Yeah, I think that you said on the blue box, that's the second biggest from the recreation, where it says lands administration up there. I think
Yeah.
you said land acquisition.
That's
So is
In there.
it? I mean, so why would we want to buy $12 million worth of new property?
when we're looking at we make strategic investments. A lot of times the funding that we're coming are meant to be strategic investments. Sometimes we have in holdings on a piece of state lands that we already are managing for Vermonters. So that's really good for us to get that in holding. So like you have a block of state lands and there's someone else owns like something in the middle. You have to manage sort of those boundaries, encroachments. It makes it much easier for us to manage as a whole. Sometimes there's strategic additions where it provides better access to lands that we already are managing. So that's another thing. And then sometimes when we're looking at the large landscape and we're like, okay, this is a really good parcel because of its ecological value, the recreational value. So every time a parcel comes up for potential state lands acquisition, it goes through a rigorous review process with our district stewardship team to look at all those values, and do we have the capacity to sort of manage it going forward?
Public comment, public input on acquisitions.
Not on acquisitions. But once they go into a long-range management planning process is when that happens.
It's not the entire 12 million for acquisition. That's
No.
In that.
Yeah, that's included in that. And those are pretty much all mostly federal dollars. We also will get some funds from VHCB, Vermont Housing Conservation Board.
To answer your question, we'll have a slide dedicated to federal funds here too. So I can tell you it's 33% of our total budget, but I'll do a quick high level overview. So our budget's 54.8 million. Of that, about 3.3 million is administration, which is roughly 6% of our budget. Forestry is 13.5, roughly 25% of our budget. Parks is 19.2 million, which is 35% of our budget, and Division of Lands and Lands Administration Recreation is 18.5, which is 33%. So as Danny mentioned, we have a $7.1 million increase over FY25. Of that, just north of 1.5 million as general fund dollars. And the remaining, or the increases are mostly comprised for general fund of benefits increases. It's about $678,000. Other general fund increases are due to salary increases, increased internal service funds, overhead, and fixed costs, and every year, like a broken record, inflation. So our federal funds, again, I'll have another slide that really gets into the nitty gritty on federal funds, is an increase of about 4 million, primarily due to new U.S. Forest Service and NBRC,
Northern
Borders Regional Commission dollars. Also some core funding from the Federal Highway Administration for a Rec Trails program. Our federal expenditures are increased associated with land acquisitions, but also with subrecipient grants. Park Special Fund would appear to be a decrease. However, in FY25, you might recall that we had budgeted for a $1.2 million landing craft or a boat to get out to the islands. So the Park Special Fund is actually an increase of about $550,000. We also have a couple of other special funds that have a slight increase due to strategic investment in our Lands Facilities Trust Fund, and then also for planned land acquisitions.
Right. Just want to go back to the boat.
Boat, yeah.
So that was budgeted for, but not actually spent, or?
We are still in the process of purchasing the boat.
So it looks like you were saying it looks like a decrease, but it's not actually a decrease. It's not actually a decrease to the actual.
So the last year's budget, if you took away the boat, we were $550,000 in excess from last year's budget.
Got it. Okay.
But there's a boat that's involved that makes it look a little bit lopsided.
Okay. Representative Nelson.
Thank you. So your wages were, what was the increase in wages?
Our increase in wages,
Not a dollar amount, but a percentage?
percentage, 6%.
6%. And do you have the percentage increase in healthcare? As I know that huge.
It was 15.8, I believe,
Thank you.
16.8, right around.
That's a.
Yeah, it's a challenge for us with the upward pressures every year and we had the exercise of trying to meet the 3%, which was difficult for us. We have a lot of personnel.
And I'll highlight too on this slide, it's a little bit deceiving. Personnel services includes personnel and all of our contracted expenses, and actually also insurance, workman's comp insurance. So it looks very high. That's primarily due to actually our contract expenses.
Representative O'Brien.
What would be an interesting graphic for us would be that previous slide where you're showing all your spending that's coming up, like how much in each category is actually coming, say, out of the general fund, because like parks generate a lot of revenue, your land administration, it's a lot of federal money, a lot of sort of endowment type money, so not much there either. So it'd be interesting to see like where the real general fund pressures are.
Yeah.
Well, it's the type of stuff I love. I'm happy to put something together for you.
I do want to go back and address, like, we have a lot of personnel. I would say we're at capacity too, but it's because we don't have a lot of operating funds. So that's where it's hard for us to absorb these upward pressures because we have nowhere really to cut. And I did want to go back on the land acquisitions. In addition to like fee acquisitions that would be part of our state portfolio, we also have a program where we work with private landowners and we buy easements on them. So the private landowners conserve the land through an easement that'll maintain it as forest and working forest. And that's probably a lot of it too.
Representative Burke.
So is it the park special fund that represents monies coming in from fees
Yes.
to?
Representative
Just quickly,
O'Brien.
so on in-holding stuff, if you can't purchase it, sometimes at least you might do a conservation easement on those little.
We actually are doing something like that in one of our, yes, you can do a conservation easement. Ideally we want to have it fee simple if it's part of state lands.
Yeah.
But other areas we would do like an easement if we have a willing landowner and we have the funds and it makes sense.
Because we saw 2 of those in the Worcester block, I think, in that map.
Right. If those come available, we would go after acquisition.
So if, Fish and Wildlife buying a block of land, does that come through Forest and Parks or is that a separate?
Fish and Wildlife has their own land acquisition team. And they buy lands for Vermonters for they have a different mission than we do. I mean, we're all in the same, A&R family, but they're looking for different wildlife habitat that they're gonna be managing for. So our management approach is also a little bit different.
Is that something that someday could be looked at to create efficiencies?
Yes, actually, I actually led an efficiency process a while ago through a lean process that looked at all A&R land acquisitions and where we could improve efficiency. So while they're different sort of departments, they work as an agency and they go through a late agency like land acquisition team. And we're actually going to be looking at how do we innovate in state lands planning, service delivery going forward to find additional efficiencies overall in state lands planning and management.
If they were gonna do, say, rough grouse releases or mixed age forests for white-tailed deer or moose, is that something that your team helps them with, or do they have their own foresters and whatnot?
No, when it comes to land planning and management, we had the district stewardship teams that Jim Duncan talked about last week, and they all work together on planning and management. So typically on Fish and Wildlife properties, it's our foresters that do the planning and management for any sort of forest management. So that is a collaborative process.
Do they move money from their budget into your budget?
Yes, we have an MOU for that.
You have an MOU for that? I can really see where there's some efficiencies could be made.
Yeah, we work really well, and we actually are going to be going through a process to look at how we do this a little bit better. It's a big body of work. It's important work. But at the district level, they do really work well together.
Yeah, great.
But
Perfect.
there is no doubt room for efficiencies.
See a bidding war between FPR and Fish and Wildlife for the same piece of property.
No, we just determine who has, like, it's also where the funding's coming from. Fish and Wildlife's got a great wetlands, strategic wetlands acquisitions. They're now doing buyouts from FEMA along rivers. So
Right now,
yeah.
they get an incredible pot of money for that.
So they work together to go who it makes the most sense to be the long-term managers. We can bring a whole land acquisition presentation if you'd like. I'm going to get over my skis.
Crossover.
So our next slide, we dive in a little bit deeper on federal funds. So our federal funds are 33% of our budget. Our funders are U.S. Forest Service, Land Water Conservation Fund, Federal Highway Administration, Northern Borders Regional Commission, and we also have ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funds, and then also FEMA funds from the last two floods. We currently have a portfolio of just about $50 million in federal awards, and of that, about 38 million is still unexpended, meaning we still have we have not expended. So we've only expended 12 million. We have 147 subrecipient awards totaling 7.6 million. Of that, approximately 5.5 million is still unspent. Outstanding liability.
How do those, how do the totals fit into the budget, this fiscal 26 budget?
So this represents the total portfolio, which has many awards that span multiple years. But
presumably, I think the thing is probably mostly on our minds is the liability of funding that hasn't yet come in that might be budgeted to go out in 26.
In 26.
Yeah.
Any concerns?
Absolutely. We're spending as quickly as we can, drawing down as much money as we can right now, and then really being strategic on how we move forward. If we think it's at risk, we're maybe pausing a little bit. Or if we think it's not, we're going as fast as we can. But there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, we did just hear yesterday that some urban and community forestry dollars that did not pass through us, but passed through a federal partner, were just all taken back. And that was 1.5 million coming to Vermont communities that is being
Taken back in the sense that we already had it in our.
it wasn't for us. It was with the Arbor Day Foundation that had granted out to Vermont communities from the Forest Service. And the Forest Service canceled those grants yesterday. So the Arbor Day Foundation had to cancel the grants to municipalities yesterday, which hits us hard because we promoted it and built it up and worked with those communities. I know there was $1 million that was going to the city of Rutland for a streetscapes project. And I think the other one, I can't remember the other community, but it was about 400,000. So there is, and they're going through, like, it's the IRA funds, right? Inflation Reduction Act funds that they've been paused for 90 days. And they're looking at all those grants and making a determination of whether or not they're going to go forward or not. Yesterday, they also released funding through NRCS IRA funds, and they were released. So it's hard to tell, but they're focusing mostly on DEI type work and climate work. But we remain hopeful, but we don't have answers to all of them right now.
Just because I don't know a lot about the federal department situation, but is US Forest Service under Interior?
It's under USDA.
It's USDA,
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm. And mainly,
Mostly where your federal money's flowing?
it's a big part of our federal money for for forestry, for sure, and then also funds Forest Legacy, which is in a different division in FPR,
And NBRC as well.
NBRC, and now Northern Regional Border Commission. Now, through the Forest Service, we get a lot of core funding, right? So like urban and community stewardship, our private lands program, we get money each year. That's kind of base dollars. And then we always go after additional competitive funds to build onto that. And so we hope that our program is going to be advocated for, and we continue to get those resources. We have a meeting at 4:00 today, every Friday. We get the latest updates. But certainly we work with our federal partners, and we have a National Association of State Foresters that we work with that are advocating at the federal level.
And it's outside your jurisdiction, but the Vermont's national forest, are those under USDA or Interior?
No, that's in its own national forest system.
Right, but
Yes, it's still in the USDA. So there's 3 branches in the Forest Service. There's research, state and private forestry, which is where most of our funds come from. And then there's the National Forest System.
That's what you were saying earlier. There were cuts or layoffs.
There was
You would try and provide a staffer to cover.
Yes, last week they announced that the Forest Service let go 3,400 staff. So that's quite a bit. And we had several here in Vermont that were let go, many.
Why don't we keep going? We've got, I think, just because we only have 5 minutes allocated here, and if we don't get time to go through everything, just for the committee's sake, we can have you come back next week and answer other questions, but there's a few more slides, so.
Yeah. This is just some key changes, just to flag for you. Vermont State Parks, we saw the bucket of the revenues coming in. The pressures to operate state parks is going up. Personnel, services. I think the example I keep using is at Maidstone State Park, it's costing us $40,000 now to move trash, right? So things are just going up. Our firewood prices are going up. Ice, everything is just going up. We've had 1 million visitors the past couple of years, which is amazing. But we've been stable at 1 million, even though, because we've had some major events. We had flooding both years. We had parks that were closed, rainy 2 years ago. So we're not keeping up with actual expenditure. So we'll be looking at how to sort of figure that out going forward, but just flagging that. You'll also see in our budget, we have a $2 million increase in funds from the Economic Development Authority. These are funds dedicated to 3 recreation access points. One is Bigham Falls and Stowe. We're going to be doing some improvements there. It's a high use area. It's a waterfall. It's beautiful, but parking and hardening off the trails, need some support. Also fire towers. We've got 8 fire towers on state lands, so 2 of them will get rehabbed. And then Smuggler's Notch, sort of the byway there we'll be investing in some stormwater improvement and parking. We are getting some increased clean water funds, particularly for skidder bridges. We heard about skidder bridges last week. We have some really large steel skidder bridges that work well in forestry operations, but also served us well after the flooding events when municipalities lost bridges. We loaned out those bridges, and they're still there, and they should be there until they can get replaced. And so we're getting some more on our queue so we can give out to forestry operations, but if needed, we would provide them to municipalities. And some more funds for state lands, best management practice for water quality. And then these new federal awards, first one is a Forest Service Award for Resilience Forestry. This would be directed funds to private landowners to help them implement best management practice around being resilient. These are ones we're watching. This is IRA funds. We're not going to spend on it until we know it's been green lighted. But it's exciting because it also includes payments to loggers for doing resilience practices. It has a certification that I'm a resilience forester, resilience logger, sort of that showing the credibility of those that work in the industry and that they're great ecosystem managers. So those are some key changes. Then significant initiative, you've heard all about some of our plans. You've heard about the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap. I don't have to tell you about that. We did a parks modernization study. That's as we're in the 100-year celebration. We're looking at what does it look like to invest for the next 100 years. And then last week, I'm sure you heard about Outdoor Recreation Day. We were all to buzz here last Wednesday, and we launched our Move Forward Vermont Together, which is all about outdoor recreation and how we steward that, wellness for all, and then also economic development. So we're moving forward on implementing that. State lands planning and management, this is an area of focus for us. It is demanding work, and we're looking for efficiencies. It's a big body of work, a lot of facilities. State parks alone has $280 million in infrastructure assets that we need to make sure we're maintaining. This also ties into the Act 59, 30 by 30, 50 by 50, and what that looks like going forward. We have staff dedicated to that initiative. Business office improvements. Our business office was really underwater for a long time. And if you don't have a business office that functions, you cannot move grants in or out. And so under Ainsley's leadership, we've built that back up with the right staffing. Actually, we had to move a forestry staff person. I moved a forestry staff person to the business office because we really needed the business office. And we're looking at some state of Vermont enterprise systems that are coming at us. So we're working on those. And then just a sort of reminder that when we have these major weather events, we're involved. State lands were hit pretty hard. We had several state parks in Groton area that were closed for a while. Brighton State Park was closed. Previous year, Camp Plymouth was closed the whole season. And then you heard about our wildland fire response. So that's sort of some things that happened this past year.
Brighton State Park closed, almost got that beaver dam might go.
Yeah.
So you've got, it looks like I'm taking a sneak peek at the rest of the presentation.
I think it's next is the budget development from the ups and downs.
So I don't know if there's anything you want to highlight here. This is just the detail.
The details, and I think we highlighted any significant changes already. Or if there's any line items you want us to, or questions, we're happy to answer.
Yeah, so right now, if there's any questions that anybody wants to dig into a particular section from an earlier slide, we can also have you back next week,
Sure.
Tuesday afternoon, to look in more detail here if the committee wants to do that. But yeah, if there's anything you wanted to just quickly mention, or
I think we covered anything that looks different from previous years.
good. All right.
Thank you for taking the
Thank you for
time.
that Review,
Yeah.
yeah, and I realize it was quite speedy, and certainly the federal piece of it. It's helpful to know just the context, I think, of how much funding does come through.
We have about 15 staff that have some portion of theirs is federal dollars. Is that what it
We
is?
have 15, so we have actually.
Oh, IRA,
So we have,
right?
we have 36 staff that
okay.
have a portion of their salaries covered with federal funds. 36, and of that, I think it equates to 18 full-time staff, but we have 7 positions right now in the hopper. We have positions with position numbers that are fully federal funded.
Yeah.
And I hope you'll, let us know if there's anything that comes through that, or that doesn't come through. Any funding that is expected that suddenly isn't there, just so that we're aware of that.
Absolutely. It's a day by day right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Got any extra, they need someone at El Capitan. It's called the Doom Spot.
We have an asset number for state parks. Has there ever been an asset done for all 350,000 acres of
For
state forest?
Oh,
How much?
we're actually in the process of developing one now. Our whole system for aid. Yeah,
That would be really
yeah,
interesting.
because all of our roads and
Right,
we need to have,
exactly.
we got to invest long-term
Yeah.
budgeting.
I will follow up with your, I guess.
Somebody needs to
Okay, that'd be
stand
great.
up and stretch just a minute while we, for our next section here. Feel free to do that. I think we're not going to take an official break.
It's the bill if you want.
That's pretty simple.
Yeah.
So, we have two bills now that, between now and noon, that we're going to have the bill sponsors introduced to us. We're going to spend 15 minutes on each roughly, so that everyone has a sense of that. They're both related to current use. And we have Representatives Maslin and Kimball, who are sponsors of H 291 to kick us off. And then Representative Burt will be speaking to H 272 in a few minutes. We'll have Ledge Council in this afternoon. Michael Grady wasn't available this morning, so we're going to have him do the actual walkthrough, the line by line.
Sure.
But if you could give us just an overview, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, ladies and gents. Glad to be here.
Tell us your name.
Us, Representative Jim Maslin, Deptford, Sharon, Stratford, Norwich.
Representative Charlie Kimball from Woodstock here in support.
And my bill is an idea in various forms that it's kicked around for a few years. We know, we've probably all heard of people who buy tracts of lands in Vermont. I'm giving the cynical version, but it's, is promptly post them and close them off for hunting and fishing, and whatever it is. And the pushback, which I think has considerable merit in some places, is that here's land that's been here for millennia. It's been hunted, it's been fished, and if people buy the land and basically close it to public use, but simultaneously take a tax advantage through current use, that many of us are disadvantaged. And in general, I agree with that. I'd also say, though, I am very much a supporter of current use. I have some land in current use, and in the classification that we've done, different classifications in the last several years, I think is very good. And my land is ledge and hemlock and deer yard and various other kinds of stuff. And it's never been posted, and it's not buildable. So it's not as if I'd like to go and make $1 zillion, and I also am very much a supporter of current use because as many, it's really over years has dramatically increased the value of the timber that's taken off land because you have to have a forest management plan updated periodically. And there's sort of it's not just about saving property taxes. It's very much also about increasing current, the value and quality of the timber that comes off current use property, which is probably Jed and others knows has shown marked benefit over several decades, I guess I could say. But so my bill, and it is similar to something they do in New Hampshire, which says if you have land in current use and you post it, the net value back to the landowner is decreased by 25%, which seems to me to be a fair trade-off. If you want the full benefit, then you can open it for hunting or fishing or whatever. But if you're going to exclude public's access to it, then why do you get the whole Monty? It's very simple. And I guess I can tell you I've had constituents, some Republicans push back against the current practice in current use where people post their land and kick people off. And many of the people that I know who have land in current use are also hunters and fishers and wouldn't object to this, I think. So I would hope that your committee would take consideration of this. And I also, we're aware that current use, when current use costs the Treasury is a considerable amount of money. So there's a trade-off here that ought to be balanced out. So that's the long and short of it. Happy to answer any questions. I think this is an idea that's been floating around there. And as some of you may know, they do something very similar in New Hampshire.
Great. Representative Nelson.
As someone that has maybe 8,000 acres in current use.
Yeah.
And
it's quite a bit.
and 90% of it is open, fully open for public use.
Yeah,
And I mean, fully
yeah,
open.
sure, absolutely.
10% of it is kept for family to
Sure.
use. Just in November, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
And when I say fully open, Bass Trails
Sure.
and Vassa Trails and walkers and hikers and foragers and
Sure.
everyone else, I have this discussion often with people back home. They say, well, you've got to keep your land open because it's in current use. I said, no, I don't. We keep our land open because we want good neighbors. And we want the kids in town to have a place to learn,
Yeah.
to enjoy what we use. And I appreciate what you say, people buying land, putting it in current use and making their own private club. And that bothers me. I don't know how we skate around this issue.
Well,
I'd hate to pay lose 25% of my value, but it would be in relative terms, small compared to the rest of what we own.
understood, and I appreciate your comment, and I recognize we introduce bills in the committee, and committee takes testimony, and there are nuances that need to be sorted out. There might be very well a pretty straightforward way for you to have all of it straightforward in current use, in a small proportion, you guys work out the particulars. Where if it's kept for a family reserve, we could say, or something
Yeah.
like that, which would be a good term. We could figure this out. I mean, it would require some surveying perhaps, but if you have a forest management plan, it probably is already perhaps divided into blocks on your application to the state. So my initiative is not meant to make things most overly complicated, but take advantage of what we're capable of doing.
Yeah.
Representative Kimball, did you want to add anything just before?
Yeah, so I signed on to the bill with Representative Maslin because I've often thought the same thing in terms of a public use of what we've considered a public good in many ways, even though it's private ownership. New Hampshire does have a different approach where they provide a recreational discount. And it's kind of an interesting concept to say, if you allow more the people to use the land for recreational or hunting or trapping, then you do get an additional discount from your property tax bill. So it's like, there's an incentive there. So either the carrot, as Representative Maslin was proposing, or no, the stick or the carrot that I'm proposing. I forgot which one it was.
That's right.
All right.
And there's no distinction between land enrolled in ag land versus forest land in your bill.
My bill is just a simple version.
Okay.
And I understand that you are both ag and forest and would probably want to make a distinction as suits the purposes of your committee, but.
Representative Lipsky. And again, we can have conversation, but I want to be sure that if there are questions for the bill sponsors about the bill, that we start with those. So.
A comment and an option regarding what Rep. Nelson brought up. Because whether it's current use, which we've known from Kingdom Trails and all others, none of these connective public uses would be possible without private landowners continuing to share access. But one thing Representative Nelson said, for 1 month a year, it's closed. So prorated. So you get 1/12 of that 25%.
Oh.
That's nothing. But the other option is to understand whether it's for peregrine falcon nesting. There are a lot of rock climbing accesses. Trails are closed. For mountain biking and even hiking during mud season, trails are closed all over the state for, maybe it's for 4 weeks, maybe it's for 8 weeks. So there's constant policy stuff. They're based on a very limited restriction. And that, I don't know how you add that to your.
Well, I'm an advocate of keep it simple, stupid. And if there's is a straightforward way to, I mean, your example of peregrines, falcons. If if an example of a place where there's peregrine falcons and it's posted by DEC or somebody for a month a year for peregrine falcons. In my personal interpretation, that's not closed.
Right.
It's just limited access for a public purpose. And it's important that we do that.
Representative Boston.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, I mean, you talked about, the access being mostly hunting and, I think you said hunting and fishing.
Yeah.
But, I mean, other things that they're talking about here are the hiking and foraging. And so like, I'm just wondering, as a person who hikes and forages.
Yeah.
But does not hunt or fish.
Yeah.
I don't hike or forage in a place that isn't posted because I don't want to be shot during hunting season. And so to me, it feels like either or would be an appropriate thing to say you have to allow hunting or you don't get the discount. That feels not safe as a person who wants to spend a lot of time in the woods during hunting season. And I want to have big stretches of
Sure.
place where I can go walk with my dog and look for mushrooms and not fear that somebody's going to shoot me in the head because I have a hat that looks like a deer. Sorry.
Appreciate that. That's a good
Representative O'Brien,
well,
go ahead if you want to respond.
sorry, well taken, well understood.
Okay.
So the expansion to recreational trail, with recreational
And the
could incorporate.
the
all
point
this
to restate what we do here is we introduce a bill
And then we work on it.
and then we work on it. And I recognize clearly there'll be some nuances and other things that are a little bit more, well, nuanced is the correct term. But I routinely carry an extra orange toque with me, just so my friends can walk out of the woods at the end of the day, you know? And that goes for Greg Clark too, if we remember him, but that's a different subject, so.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I had a clarification question, I'm asking the whole committee here. As far as I know, if the state of Vermont, unless your land is posted and you're not around certain homesteads or livestock areas, access is open to everybody, right?
Unless otherwise posted or
Posted
something.
every 400 feet
And recorded.
and recorded. I'm not opposed to have a chat with you gentlemen in the cafeteria. I like the carrot approach. There's somewhere in the middle, maybe, that if you open, they talked about offering dollars to have trails, fast trails, VASA trails, mountain biking trails across your land. I've always thought, geez, I get current use. Why do they need to pay me for that? And maybe.
Yeah.
There's.
Well, I can't speak for Representative Maslin. I don't think what this bill is suggesting is to create a new category for qualification for current use. We're not contemplating that. This is really about the existing land that can be enrolled in current use being open to other activities. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, thank you both.
Great.
We will look for you in the cafeteria, in the hallway, in your committee room, down the hall, if we have other questions, and we may have you back if there's reason to. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Ladies, to be here, Charlie, folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
We know you're busy, so we'll fill you in on the next bill.
A couple doors away, right? I'm glad to know you're foraging too. It's good stuff.
I want to learn.
Brought me to this committee.
So
What's that?
we have to change seats here.
Not enough courage to go foraging in a place where people are hunting. Yeah.
We have to introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
The introductions are gonna take a while.
Yeah. It's a different perspective I know from that seat.
Yeah.
And having been in that seat in other committees too. So I know that it's not just you, Greg, who sponsored the bill, but I think you're the first name on the bill and came up with the idea or some of the ideas. So you get the privilege of kicking it off, and then, we'll have certainly everybody who wants to say something can say something about it too. So this now is H273.
Right. For the record, I'm Greg Burke,
Yeah, so this is kind of just proposing some simple changes to current use. I'll just read the statement of purpose. This bill proposes to amend the eligibility requirements for the use value appraisal program by providing that a farmer is eligible for the program when the farmer earns at least 25% of the farmer's annual gross income from the business of farming. The bill would also reduce the percentage rate of the land use change tax from 10% to 6% of the full fair market value of the changed land. In addition, the bill would define a farmer eligible for enrollment of agricultural land to include a person who earns at least 25% of the farmer's income from the raising, feeding, or management of equines. So yeah, basically after we heard testimony from quite a few folks, it seemed reasonable to me and just knowing the landscape of farming personally and hearing from other constituents that there are difficulties these days with a threshold of 50% of farmers' gross annual income coming from farming, with the need to work off the farm to sustain their standard of living. So I think that reducing that to 25% would still make it so that you are having to make real income from farming, but at a level that is more matched to the current landscape of agriculture in our state. And then the change from 10% penalty, if you want to call it that, to 6% when you take out a piece of land from current use, I think is mostly stimulated. Well, it's from a couple of things. First of all, hearing testimony about, young or new farmers who want to begin farming. A lot of times they want to build a house on the property. And by the time you pay for that penalty on taking 2 acres out, it all of a sudden is becoming much more difficult for them to afford to be able to do that. There's that reason. There's also wanting to increase the potential for housing in our state. And if we can reduce the cost to a homeowner in rural areas to put up a homestead, as much as I think it's important to have housing in village centers and near village centers. I also think I'm a firm believer in homesteading, and a lot of people don't want to have a house in or near a village. They want to be out in rural areas where they can access more land. So I think that would help with our housing issue as well. And also, I think it actually could be an economic driver because a lot of people, including the constituent that Representative, I can't remember his name offhand, Charlie, who was just sitting right here. Kimball. He was bringing up the case that he had a constituent that looked into selling a parcel and decided not to because of the amount of tax he was going to have to pay to do that. So that's inhibiting development. And so it also inhibits dollars that could be coming into current use. So if we adjust the percentage to the right amount or the rubric, Charlie suggests, basing it not on an appraisal, but on a percentage of the total land area of the whole parcel, which I think that's a great idea too. Either way, make it easier and more incentivized for people to want to develop certain parts of their property. I think that would actually be an economic driver because not only do you have more tax dollars coming in directly to current use from people selling that piece, you also have another homestead that's now paying taxes to the state.
At some point, if the bill were to come to the floor, JFO would weigh in and say, and give an estimate of the impact to the revenue, to state revenue. And I don't know, did you talk to JFO already and get any estimates?
I haven't yet.
Yeah, I think that they may not even be willing to have conversations until a bill gets to Ways and Means. So I'm not sure how the process actually works, but at some point that would happen. We could, but I think we'll reach out and ask them. We have had them in before. We had them in fact, last week on the school meals. That was analysis that they'd already done. They were prepared to share. So we can reach out and see if they're available for comment on these bills, please. Oh, questions? Or do you have more, Craig?
That, well, then there's the equine part, which we heard testimony on that. I've talked to Senator Heffernan this morning about this because they're looking at it in their committee. And he was glad that language is in there from his experience in his district. Also hearing from constituents that it's a problem. So, yeah.
Richard?
Yes, Mr. Burke, did you take any consideration into acreage on this, or is it still the 25 acre minimum? Like, we've heard from people that are trying to farm, the vegetable farmers and whatnot that are working on smaller plots of land.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think they deserve the protection of current use as well? And could be brought down to any land that's used for agriculture in the, and forestry. Are you taking any consideration for forestry people with this as well?
Yeah, so I did think about forestry. As long as you have a forest man, I mean, I'm not a guru on current use statute, but from what I understand, and Jed, maybe you can help me out with this. I mean, you just need a land forestry management plan in order to be enrolled with at least 25 acres.
Dedicated to forest.
So as long as your income can come from any kind of different source, it's not income based. It's whether or not you have it.
Right.
So that was, I guess I hadn't heard of a potential issue with regard to forest land management for that reason.
The cycle of income is a lot of what management does. Has to do with invasives and other very low end products. So that's forest only on a much longer scale, maybe 30 or 40 years, you get significant economic return. So it's not relative. But I just would like to comment that I support all of your reasoning for every one of your suggestions as being helpful. Particularly, we are all struggling with workforce, and when a Vermont family, whether they've been here for generations or a few years, need access to land, and without access to housing in rural areas, that workforce challenge is going to be insurmountable. So, in the equine, all farming, this issue of 50% of your income, most farms or families have multiple off-farm job incomes forced to just to cover living. So I think, Representative, I'm really supportive of the broad scope of this bill.
Thank you.
Does anybody here know, we've heard something about their allowances for under 25 acres if you're farming in certain situations?
Is that with like an income threshold?
I don't think it's that, but it's,
I don't know the exact numbers, but I think I could answer that. And that was one of your questions too. But it's if you produce $2,000 worth or more off the land in farm income, or it's $75 an acre, I think. So I don't know, what's seven.
current use or not?
That's currently in there right now. So you can, I believe, I'd have to look at the details of that, but I think you can be under 25 acres as so long as you're creating $2,000 worth per
I think
off of that land in farm income. There's also stipulations too that, and even that's, who produces, and I don't want to take up more time, I don't know what happens, but I guess we're getting there. Who produces farm crops that are processed in a farm facility situated on land enrolled by the farmer in a use value appraisal program or on a house site adjoining the enrolled land. who produces on the farm a minimum of 75% of the farm crops processed in the farm facility. So there are other stipulations.
You have to produce 75% of on-farm stuff, I think, to beat the Act 250, it only has to be 51% of farm products, that has to be yours. And then you can make special some products.
Yeah, so I mean, that number could be adjusted too if we, in committee, if we felt like that number could be adjusted, but it's basically just trying to make sure you're not actually a processor who's taking advantage of current use. You're actually a farmer who's, that way, with 75% of what you are processing coming from your farm, it would inhibit that from happening.
51.
We have Michael Grady in after lunch to walk through. We can drill in a little bit if we have on the distinction between 25 acres, more than 25 and less than. I think that's important, and there's enough different things happening here. It's confusing for me. All right, good. Well, thank you very much, Representative Burt, for joining us.
Yes.
Thank you for this fresh experience and the same people.
Yeah. Have you presented in other committees? Introduced?
I just talked to Senator Heffernan this morning individually, but
You may.
so this is a good way to start. Thank you.
Yeah, good, because if you may be in another committee tomorrow or next week.